Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's a new type of webinar that we're hosting, so we're really glad that you joined us for the first of this new series. So some of you may not know that we actually have a hidden committee full of science experts that are supporting MWCC's work, and it's called WAWAG. It's our Water Activities Working Group. It's actually a collection of technical water professionals who serve MWCC and the broader watershed community. It's a working group. It's striving to connect us with the organizations, agencies, and best available water science. So they're actually practicing experts in the field every day. So we've decided in our move forward to move away from conservation conversations, we are going to have WAWEG help provide webinars, write blog posts, help us maintain the watershed resource library, the monitoring directory, and the monitoring library to make sure we can keep our science top notch. And really, they're the best connection to do that. So as we get into this restoration practices webinar, just start with thank you, WAWAG. Abby Ebert is on our WAWAG committee and huge reason that this has happened. So we really appreciate that. So today we have Ella Looney, who's also on our WAWAG committee, who is going to do the presentation. So that's just kind of information for you all to know what exactly WAWAG is and what to expect from us coming forward. They're not going to be any specific order of operations or timing, but we will give you a heads up when these webinars are coming out, because right now we have a special series by DEQ. So just to be aware today for our schedule, we do have 90 minutes for the webinar. So there's going to be a presentation until about 10 o'clock, and then we have time for question and answer. So you can add your questions in the chat at any time, and Kiera and I will help monitor that. And feel free, since it's a good smaller group, we can raise your hand, have you guys ask questions, unmute, so you can really get information you need. Hopefully we're kicking off Monday with some good energy for your restoration work that you have coming up this summer. So with that, we will jump in. We're going to dive into today's WAWAG Restoration Practices webinar. I want to start with that thank you again, Abby Ebert, our Chair of Water Activities Working Group, and she is part of DEQ's Monitoring and Assessment section. She's really helped make all this happen. So we're super thankful for that and hope that you enjoy this new series we're presenting. Presenting today is Ella Looney from Montana Department of Environmental Quality, also from the 319 program. She's a water quality specialist, part of DEQ's non-point source and wetlands section, and will be presenting on when restoration is needed and the common restoration techniques. So grab your coffees. I'm going to give her the screen share and we can enjoy her presentation.
Ella, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, everybody. As Amy said, I'm Ella Lenny with Non-Point Source and Wetlands section at DEQ. And I'm here to basically talk to you guys about watershed health and these restoration techniques that we've been seeing across Montana. There is no one-size-fits-all restoration technique. The most successful project are those that match the watershed goals that we've developed, our site conditions, and our landowner objectives. And so today we're just going to explore when restoration is needed and then review those common restoration techniques that we've seen. And first, I want to just talk about Section 319. I know a couple of you who have registered for this are not aware of our 319 program. So all of the restoration projects that I'm going to go through today were funded in part by Section 319. It is one of the primary sources available for watershed restoration projects in Montana. This program was established through the Clean Water Act to address non-point source pollution. And I think not all of our questions need to be answered before we start receiving funding for our projects. The 319 funding can support watershed planning. It can support project design, restoration implementation, the effectiveness monitoring that goes into all of our projects, and education and outreach and technical assistance. So 319 funding can support any phase throughout your project. The common thread is that the projects must address non-point source pollution and basically support our water quality improvement goals. Sorry. And Section 319 is only one piece of this funding puzzle. So a successful restoration project will often combine multiple funding sources. So your project goals hopefully identify which funding opportunities are the best fit. A wetland restoration project may combine conservation district funding and private fundings, or we might have a floodplain restoration project that's using 319 and NRCS assistance. So one reason that I just mentioned this early is because often our project goals will determine those funding opportunities, and then understanding your objectives from the beginning will position you in a place for the best funding success, and ultimately then project implementation. So why are we talking about restoration? There's so many aspects that go into restoration. What our watershed goals are, what our landowner goals are, what's going on in the stream, the water quality. And across Montana, we have so many groups, watershed groups, conservation districts, tribes, landowners, spending significant time and resources into restoration projects. But for all of them, it really means different things. It can mean reducing erosion for one, but for others, it's all about improving fish habitat. And so we are focusing on today choosing the right restoration techniques and addressing that root cause of concern associated with restoration, but more so is identifying what goals lead us to what types of restoration techniques we will be using. So I want to discuss how we decide which restoration techniques are appropriate for a particular watershed problem, and then just going over some of these practices that we use. So there is kind of this hierarchy to restoration. And though for many watershed groups, this might not be the goal, but protecting healthy systems should be a priority. Intact streams, wetlands, riparian areas, these all provide valuable functions and are often, much less expensive to protect than it is to repair once they're degraded. So the most cost-effective, restoration project is often protecting that intact resource before it becomes degraded. And then on top of that is maintaining function. So healthy watersheds benefit from stewardship practices to help prevent those future problems. But kind of like the meat of this presentation is about restoring and enhancing. But of course, we want to pay attention to that protecting and maintaining of restoration or of our stream systems. But restoration comes into play when a system has been degraded and the key functions have been lost. And that goal is to restore those key functions and improve the system's resilience overall. And then we also have enhancement, which we really see this often with like wetland enhancement and floodplain enhancement projects. But those are targeted improvements where a system is already functioning, but additional benefits can be achieved. So another key takeaway is just that restoration is only part of this watershed management puzzle. And so protecting and maintaining healthy healthy resources is often the most cost effective. And we should try to do that before we get into these nitty gritty restoring and enhancing, which has a lot of limitations associated with them. Okay, so many people think, or I guess think that restoration means fixing that stream channel. And as I kind of said, it's about seeking to restore those watershed processes that overall support the healthy aquatic ecosystems. And the answer isn't necessarily a stream's appearance at some point in the past. Restoration is really about returning it to its healthy functioning condition. That means restoring the physical chemical processes and allowing it to sustain over time. Again, the whole part is that we want this stream to be able to sustain itself over time. And it really helps to think about a restored stream not as a picture of like what it was in the past, but as a movie. These streams are evolving, they're changing, and that's what we want. A healthy stream is transporting water and sediment, and it's supporting aquatic life and its floodplain. It's doing all of these things without excessive degradation. It's important to recognize that streams are these dynamic systems. They naturally change over time in response to whatever it may be: climate, vegetation, land use, your watershed conditions. And because of that, our goals and expectations are also going to evolve with the stream. Rather than trying to create that static channel, we focus on restoring the processes and functions that allow them to kind of adapt over time and stay resilient. And here's a beautiful example of how this is a healthy stream, and there's some erosion happening. There's some bank degradation happening, but that's okay. Their streams are dynamic. And not every eroding bank is a restoration problem. And that's kind of the key point to this. We're going to talk about bank stabilization techniques and when they're appropriate. But because streams naturally migrate, erode, deposit sediment, it may look like it's a restoration problem, but it's not. A healthy stream is not frozen in place. Stability means that the stream can adjust while maintaining its overall function. And so to really understand that, we need to look at a stream through its evolution, because we want to know where a stream is in this kind of diagram, this evolutionary process, to know what restoration techniques to apply to the stream. So whatever step we're in can help us determine what restoration techniques are actually going to return this natural stream to its processes. A disturbance can push a stream out of balance, and it basically follows a very predictable sequence of adjustment until eventually it reaches its new stable condition down here at 5. And understanding where that stream is in the evolution can identify the root cause of degradation, which is ultimately what we want to treat. So number 1, this is our reference condition. This stream has access to its floodplain even during high flows. Its sediment is entering the stream and leaving the stream in a balanced way. The banks are stable, and they're supported by healthy vegetation. At this stage, restoration isn't really needed. The best approach is protection and maybe maintenance, removing of invasives and things like that. But at this point in time, we don't need to do restoration. But then we move into kind of this incision chapter of a stream. And when something has disturbed the balance, maybe it's the runoff has increased, or the channel is starting to straighten, a culvert was installed, then we're starting to have incision downstream. As the channel deepens, it disconnects from its floodplain, and instead of spreading that water across the floodplain during high flows, that water is trapped and remains trapped in the channel, increasing velocity increasing erosion. And if we ignore those underlying causes and just simply stabilize the banks, which a lot of people tend to do with riprap and things during this stage, the stream often continues to cut downstream, and that high energy is now causing more erosion downstream. So it's just a temporary band-aid to do bank stabilization at this point. So we always want to address that source of increased runoff or altered hydrology associated with this, and choose a restoration technique that's actually going to address that root cause. Then we'll move into this widening. So once the channel has cut as deep as it can't go anymore, those banks become too tall and steep to remain stable. They start to collapse into that channel, and the stream widens as it gains stability again. This is when we're seeing tons of sediment enter the water, and an increase in turbidity, just burying downstream habitat, burying fish habitat. And then during this time, yes, we'll see some potential restoration approaches. This is really where we're seeing a lot of those low-tech structures that we will talk about, BDAs or beaver dam analogs, and post-assisted log structures, and then also high-tech. Of course, we don't want to go to high-tech and heavy engineering or active management. There's many words for it, but that heavy engineering techniques do cause a lot of I don't want to say a lot, but they are intensive in the stream bed, and they do have a long process to recover. And so we only want to use those when we need to, but this is when often those are needed. Okay, and now we're moving into the stream beginning to stabilize itself back. So eventually that excess sediment that we see begins depositing all within the channel. The stream starts building a new floodplain. Now the floodplain is a lot lower than it was before because of all of that sediment. Vegetation begins colonizing on all of that deposited sediment. It strengthens the banks. It slows all the erosion, and it's beginning to recover and develop its own new balance. At this point, the restoration should focus on encouraging these natural processes rather than rebuilding an entire channel. It's starting to stabilize. The stream looks a lot different than it did before, or is starting to. And so we want to not be so intense. We want to allow the stream to become stable. And so again, we're using more of passive low-tech restoration techniques during this stage of a stream. Okay, and then now we're all the way to 5, stable again. So the stream has reached its new equilibrium. It once again has that functioning floodplain that it did at the beginning. Looks a little different. It's lower because of all the sediment. It's regained its balance between flow and sediment transport and the channel form and water flow. And so the main point is that all of our restoration should work within these natural processes rather than trying to freeze a stream in place. We don't want a number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 forever. Our goal isn't a static channel, it's a resilient one. So we need it to be able to adapt over time, because it's going to, no matter what we do. So we should encourage that. And this is a really cool diagram. This shows how stream channels naturally take on different forms depending on the amount and the type of sediment that they're transporting, along with some other things. So on the left hand side, these channels are dominated by fine sediment, if you look at the top axis, or fine sediment or suspended load, which tend to be kind of more stable and often develop those meandering patterns. Then when we move to the right, we're seeing streams transport kind of cobbles or more coarse sediment along the stream bed, and these become less stable and more likely to shift over time. So seeing a little bit more degradation. And then at the top, we see those street channels, which we don't often see in a natural environment. They're relatively uncommon in nature. And these are basically, or it's when they're forced into confinement, probably from human disturbance. And then in that middle, we're seeing the meandering channels that we most people look at and say, that is a healthy stream. They dissipate energy evenly. They're creating habitat diversity. They allow the stream to access its floodplains easily. So yes, they often are a healthy stream. And then at the bottom, we're seeing braided channels. So these streams, they carry a lot of sediment, and they frequently shift into bars and islands and things like that. They do appear like they're unstable, but in many settings, these braided channels are they're natural and they're functioning channel type. And as we start through that evolution, they are going through their processes. And although it can take decades, a long time for them to reach another stable channel, at some point, they might. So kind of all of that was like this precursor to when does a stream need restoration. One of the most common mistakes in restoration is selecting a technique before we fully understand what the problem is. We see eroding bank and we just want to get rid of it. But before we select a restoration technique, it's important to understand what we're trying to solve. And it's really great to ask questions to get there. So what is the root cause of the problem? Are we seeing elevated sediment? Are we seeing nutrient loading, stream bank erosion, habitat degradation? It could be a combination of these issues. So what are we trying to treat? Then we want to identify what the stressor is, or what the pollutant sources are. So there's a lot of indicators. It could be excessive erosion. As I said, erosion is a natural process, but erosion that contributes a significant amount of sediment, or maybe it's threatening infrastructure or lower or water quality, that may indicate a problem. We might have channel incision where the stream's becoming disconnected to its floodplain or its water. And all this water and sediment is being concentrated within the channel. That might be a problem. Water quality, of course. I work for DEQ, so we're thinking about this 24/7. But that can also identify the restoration needs, elevated sediment, nutrients, temperature, or all those pollutants may indicate an impaired, that's how the term that we're using, watershed processes. And then, and so on. We could talk about this all day. Ultimately, restoration should be driven by an understanding of what the watershed function is. So we're not restoring streams to look a certain way. We want to treat one of these issues, or one of these problems. And then once we kind of understand the cause, what is happening, what we want to treat, we can evaluate whether passive restoration is enough. And passive restoration is kind of the restoration technique we're using when we're looking at, if we're thinking of that stream evolution, whether it's in 1, 2, 4, maybe in 5. Basically, passive restoration, in many situations, it's just about removing the stressor and allowing the natural recovery to produce those long-term benefits. So it might be just in removing invasives, putting up a fence so that the riparian corridor is protected. However, often, natural recovery is unlikely. And in those cases, active restoration or high-tech restoration is needed. And then finally, we'll have every project should have a clear way to measure success. So success should be tied directly to what the project goals are. If the goals are sediment reduction, then you gotta monitor sediment. If the goal is to improve habitat, then we should be looking at biological indicators. It's defining that success early helps guide the project design and the funding decisions. Oh yeah, and then I kind of talk about landowner support throughout this, and that is really what's going to guide this whole thing, is working with landowners and ensuring that you're working together and that your goals are aligned. And so we can't do a beaver restoration project on a private land if the landowner hates beavers. So often the biggest thing that might lead to failure is miscommunication with the landowner on what they want ultimately for their property. And so some restoration conditions. So ensuring the proposed treatment addresses the root cause. We've talked about this in a ton, but I'm just going to boil everything down here before we get into our actual restoration techniques. So we've identified the root cause of degradation or pollution or whatever it may be. If we don't address those underlying causes, even the most expensive restoration technique or project is unlikely to provide lasting results. Usually the energy of that stream will just continue down, and we'll see issues downstream of whatever this project may be. We prefer to err on the side of passive restoration, focusing on restoration that initiates or accelerates those natural hydraulic geomorphic processes that lead to improved stream and floodplain conditions. And we're going to talk about passive restoration in a second. But and then again, choosing a method that aligns with the watershed landowner goals. I just said this, but in order to have a successful project, they have to align. And they're just projects are more likely to be implemented, of course, but also maintained and provide those like lasting environmental benefits when you're addressing that root cause, as well as meeting the landowner goals, because we need their long-term management. Okay, so restoration generally falls on a spectrum from passive to active, or from passive to high-tech restoration. So neither approach is inherently better than the other. It's just the appropriate approach depends on site conditions and project goals. So we have passive restoration, which is focusing on removing those factors that are causing the degradation and allowing those natural recovery processes to occur. So this could be fencing livestock from streams, improving grazing management, establishing riparian buffers. The thing with passive is if you can do it, do it. It's cheap. But often all these low-tech, medium, high-techs, they all include passive restoration. So we talk about this, I'm going to go over some projects with passive restoration, but every project has passive restoration. Every project replants vegetation, and most of our 319 projects, there, has fencing associated with it to protect that riparian buffer or whatever it may be. So it's kind of essential. And then we have low tech, which is focusing on kind of like mildly invasive techniques that mimic the channel's natural processes. So this could be installing the structures that encourage those processes, like beaver dam analogs and post-assisted logging structures, which we're going to talk about. And an advantage of passive and low-tech restoration is its sustainability. So these projects have less construction, they're lower costs, fewer maintenance needs, although definitely with low tech, there's some, well, all of them have maintenance needs. But the limitations is that they take a long time. Even, they take years and years, depending on the site conditions, to see the full extent of what they're doing. A lot of times it's immediate, like they definitely have an immediate benefit, but for those long term, for a lot of aspects of it, it does take a while. Whereas high tech kind of is a little bit more immediate. So with that high tech or active restoration, that's like direct physical modification to the system. This could be channel reconstruction, completely reconstructing entire channel or realigning it, floodplain excavation, bank stabilization, removal of mine waste, which I'm just going to talk about, which is, actually a really big issue in Montana, just of all of our abandoned mine lands. But these projects can produce immediate changes to the stream, and are definitely necessary when that natural recovery is just not possible. So as restoration practitioners, we should generally ask whether passive restoration is an option, whether low tech is an option. Can that achieve our desired outcome before we move to these high tech, more invasive restoration techniques? So I'm going to go over some examples. All of these examples were funded through the 319 program, or in part by the 319 program. And I guess just to set the stage, I'm not an engineer or a restoration designer. My role at DEQ is to work with partners to identify these projects, fund these projects, and support them throughout the extent of their life, through, may it be design, implementation, and then the following monitoring. So I'm going to be focusing on these, or giving you guys examples. But engineering specifics, we could spend a whole day on each one of these techniques, because there's just techniques within techniques for each one of them. And I'm going to go through that spectrum. We'll start with passive. Oh yeah, so first, do nothing. Duh. When we think about restoration, our instinct is to often jump straight to building something, adding structures, reshaping channels. But obviously, if it's possible, if you're here, this probably is not the case. But in some cases, we might evaluate the site and we might see that the stream has already had the ability to recover it on its own, or it's doing that efficiently. And all we have to do is kind of remove some invasives and call it a day. But that would be a win, but probably not the case. So I start with the passive restorations, and specifically, I'm going to just talk about riparian buffers and fencing exclusion areas or livestock management, because these are just foundational techniques. They're not standalone project, or they're typically not standalone projects. They're like the bedrock of almost every restoration effort. Even if we execute $1 million project, it will fail if we if we haven't addressed this riparian habitat. Of course, there's many projects where this is all we have to do, but this is included. Riparian buffers and fencing is often included in all the future projects that I'm going to talk about today. And so by planting those native shrubs and grasses and trees sometimes within our stream corridors, we create that natural filter. This creates a vegetation strip that will help agricultural fertilizers. It traps that extra sediment coming through that could ultimately smother fish habitat or fish spawning gravels. It's a canopy needed to keep the stream temperatures cool, also important for water quality and the fish. And so there's many benefits to riparian buffers. This one's kind of simple. I think we all understand the importance of them, but we do always have to be realistic. Trees take years to mature, and establishing these buffers means that we're taking agricultural land or grazing pastures permanently away from active production from the landowners. And so this, all of our projects, but this definitely requires early transparent conversations about those land use trade-offs with the landowners. For 319, we require a 35-foot buffer of riparian habitat on the edge of a stream. No matter what the project is, that needs to be established and maintained. And so it's important that everybody is aware of that at the beginning of any planning of a project. And then just to move straight into fencing and livestock, it really is the natural partner to riparian buffers. Unmanaged livestock grazing just completely degrades the stream system. And actually, 35% of Montana's assessed streams that were identified as impaired are identified as impaired for agricultural related activities. So 35% are affected by this. And so at the 319 program, we have a ton of projects associated with them. There's a ton of benefits and very not, it's minimally invasive. We're just putting fences up. We're just establishing a grazing management plan. Off-water stock tanks are a big one here that we often do. All of this, we're trying to establish a riparian corridor. We're trying to keep the cattle off the stream as much as possible. It's not required. A lot of landowners will put off stream water tanks and then just have a little access area for their cows, and that's okay. All of these things are okay. It's just trying to reduce the impact as much as possible. And again, those limitations, there's continuous fencing maintenance costs. A lot of times this is cheaper than what the landowner was dealing with before, but it is still worth saying. And I think also it's important to kind of frame this, or at least frame off stream water tanks to landowners as a health improvement project, because studies have shown that cattle drinking off channel gain weight faster and suffer less diseases. So we can also frame these things. It's not only a water quality issue, it's also a health benefit to the livestock. But we always want to work with the landowner throughout this process to ensure that they're able to maintain these riparian corridors, maintain a livestock management plan, and at least keep a fence up until the corridor has had the ability to establish itself. So this is on the East Fork of the Bitterroot. This project's purpose was to reduce temperature and sediment loading to the East Fork of the Bitterroot River. With this project, we did a riparian corridor. We included riparian fencing. In some areas, we did rebuilding of the vegetated banks. And this is it right after the project was completed. So 3 years into the project, you can see the fence on the left-hand side. The corridor is growing and establishing itself pretty well. And then this was this year. And as you can see, those willows have established ours very well. And really this is about 5 years into the project, 5.5 years into the project. And we're already seeing a huge impact. This is a filter system. It's basically protecting that water. It's lowering the temperatures of the water, and there's no longer livestock access. Okay, moving to low tech. So we have post-assisted log structures, or PALs. I'm going to call them PALs now. Many of Montana's streams are missing woody debris. That could be because of historic logging, channel clearing. But PALs are these hand-built structures made to mimic natural woody debris jams that happen in streams. They're constructed by driving untreated wooden posts into the stream bed and weaving locally. It could be, well, often it's locally, if we can have it locally, wood like willow plants through those wood jams in between them. And they force the water to create deep pools. They create habitat for fish spawning. And they push high flows into the floodplain, which is like the true benefit of this. These are our low-tech structures, PALs and BDAs, are really great for like pushing water into the floodplain and creating that infiltration for ground. That's so important for groundwater. These are designed to be dynamic though, so they will change shape. They're going to trap debris and eventually decompose. And then as a stream system recovers its natural balance, they basically degrade and they've like reestablished the stream. You want to add these to your stream when you need roughness in the stream or when you want to slow water. PELs help dissipate that energy. They reduce the stream power and slow the flow velocity. So you're basically creating a little mini barrier. And it's really invaluable for incised or degraded channels that are transporting too much sediment or, having those little eroding banks. And if you want to promote sediment deposition, this is also a good option because they are creating those small backwaters in the low velocity zones. They trap that bed load and suspended sediment. Not as good as BDAs, but they do trap sediment really well, and then raise that bed to improve the floodplain connectivity. And then I think a lot of people, when we're care about fish, this is a great option because it does create such great habitat and for aquatic organisms as well as for fish. And they're low cost, so they can be installed. I think, I have like a mini video in a second, but yeah, they are really low cost because they only require small crews to do hand tools. So it's really great for remote areas where we can't get heavy machinery there. And often a lot of our projects will use conifers that are encroaching on the stream or conifer encroach, or if there's, they'll use local resources to build these post-assisted log structures. And I think the main limitations is, yeah, there's maintenance, because if you're not seeing the goal achieved right away, then you will have to conduct maintenance because they have transient lifetimes. They require maintenance, and they run the risk of just being displaced during any major flow that might happen. That's kind of the biggest thing. Eventually we want them to just become a part of the stream, but sometimes it might happen a little earlier than we expected. And during those high flows, they're prone to be damaged. And then I put they require suitable wood availability. They don't technically require it, but it's a lot cheaper when there is wood around for you to use rather than shipping things in. So Mandeville is a great example of this. This is a before and after picture. And also you can just see in this before and after picture, not only, I know it's not one for one. We didn't have an aerial view yet because this project is ongoing. So there'll be another aerial or a better aerial view probably this summer. But in that before, you're seeing no riparian corridor really. There is some bank erosion and sediment deposition happening. No wetland or floodplain areas. And then after riparian area has there's 35-foot buffer. There's also wetlands. It's hard to tell on this, but yeah, the project created great wetlands. The goal though was to increase nutrient uptake on Mandeville Creek, capture fine sediment, we had a lot of sediment coming in. Increase that floodplain reconnection that you don't even see in the before, and then restore all those riparian corridors. There's a lot of other goals of this project. Groundwater, increased groundwater storage was a big one. And what we, for this aspect, we'll just talk about these PALs right now. 47 PALs were installed in, and you can kind of see some of them here. There's also BDAs on this project, which I'll show in a second, but just did a great job of elevating those channels, providing access to the floodplain, allowing that riparian corridor to grow and establish itself. And just so many benefits from that Mandeville Creek project. I could talk all day about it. And then so beaver dam analogs. So like PALs, these are low-tech structures. They're built using wooden posts and woven willow brush as well. And they are designed to mimic the hydraulic effects of beaver dams. So they're effective at slowing down fast-moving water, trapping sediment. Really great for incised channels and raising that local water table. These do a great job at raising the water table as well and improving that infiltration into the groundwater. They're ideal for incised channels or low gradient, like low gradient valley floors that had a historic population of beaver. So, and because we want local brushwood and willow materials that are in the area for us to use and for the future beavers to use. So, really great when we want to raise the water surface elevation. And we want to reconnect those floodplains when we want to encourage beaver activities. So these are designed to entice beavers to colonize. So it gives them a starter dam. If beaver occupation is part of your restoration goals, this is a good one. And then improve groundwater storage. These do trap sediment a lot better than PAL. So that's if you have the ability, if the landowners are on board, BDAs are always a great choice for that as well. And then there are some limitations. You want historical beavers. It's not for every stream type. We're thinking about incised channels, but when they're braided channels, things get a lot complicated. And it really requires landowner support. So we want them on board. There's a beaver conflict resolution program, which helps to get landowners to kind of understand the benefits of beavers. But this is a big barrier for a lot of landowners, and it takes considerable time to work with them to ensure that everybody's goals are being met and that this is a true want for the community. So Mandeville Creek also did BDAs here. You can see it really created a beautiful wetland because it just pushed that water back. And you can see these are kind of these posts where they wove the willow in. And I think, here's just to show how minimally invasive it is. Obviously it is, you're standing in the stream, you're working, but it's really easy and it's great for remote areas. That's trout embedded there. Okay, and now moving on to high tech. I'm going to kind of speed through this. Okay, so wetland creation and restoration projects. Typically, these projects are best used when historic wetlands were lost or water storage and nutrient reduction are our goals. So wetlands work as a massive filter that can process any nutrients, agricultural nutrients, urban nutrients, mining runoff. They can buffer local communities from peak flows or those heavy flows that come through, and then recharge that groundwater. And of course, it fosters biodiversity. Like, these encourage everything, wildlife, aquatic species, everything to come to your area. But they are very expensive. Planning a wetland takes a lot of work. So there's a lot of monitoring and assessments that go through that, like soil assessments to ensure that a wetland is achievable in that area. And then they're just heavily at risk for like invasives and things like that. Often we see there's many wetland techniques that can be done. We might see plugging and filling of draining ditches. It could just be like reconnecting the abandoned oxbows that we often see on our rivers, installing the BDAs, and then or any other structures, PALs as well, to raise that water elevation and then spread that flow onto a wetland area. So there's many techniques to wetland creation, and all of this is kind of talked about through that design phase. The Story Mill, this was a 55-acre project on the outskirts of Bozeman, and it transformed this industrial water-powered mill to a wetland. And it was formerly a wetland, but then it was drained for agriculture. And the goal was to reestablish that wetland. It took a lot of work. There was excavations and reestablishment associated with this, but ultimately, nutrients was also a really big issue. Our goal was to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus pollution in this area. But I'll say, like, there was many aspects of this project, a floodplain as well. And we've done wetlands on the Mandeville Creek project, some mining projects as well. These are intensive. They require a lot of planning, but they have proven to be just huge successes. So if you can get that funding support, they're really worth it. Here's another picture of it. So this is the during implementation where they've kind of excavated and taken a lot of that out. Oh, here we go. Then the water flooded in and eventually became this kind of wet floodplain complex. So total different look now. And this was taken years ago, so I wish I had an updated picture as well. Floodplain reconnection. So the Story Mill project also had aspects of this, but a ton of our Montana rivers are disconnected from their floodplains. This could be like agricultural dikes, levees, like channel incision, so many reasons. But when that happens, when that water is disconnected, it's trapped in that narrow channel, and it just is a fire hose, and it just keeps getting worse and worse, and just kind of can ultimately destroy downstream infrastructure, which is why a lot of these projects begin. But reconnection, you can use BDAs to do this. You can use PALs. Whatever technique you use, your goal is basically to kind of raise that water level. Often it's to deal with that channel incision, or maybe if flood peaks are a concern, or high water flows. Here we see Flint Creek. So this was the goal, or this project was to reduce, or ultimately restored 2,500 feet of riparian corridor. You can see this bank. It has disconnected from its floodplain on the left-hand side. We have a high bank there, and then on the right-hand side, that was graded out, and root wad structures were put in to stabilize that bank. And now it is just connected to its floodplain. Looks fabulous. I think I have some other. Oh, okay. Miller Creek. Again, the goal of this one was floodplain connectivity. Sediment was an issue, and there was a lot of stream bank erosion, as you can see on this left-hand side. They restored the channel morphology in this. They reconnected the floodplain, They did introduce some woody vegetation, as you can see on the right picture, and also revegetated the buffer. And I think, yeah, this one just itself reduced sediment load by 14 pounds a year. So all of these have water quality benefits. Here's another aspect of Miller Creek. As you can see, it looks like a pretty straight channel, but in the left-hand side, it's just incised and just deep flowing water. And so that was widened and some woody debris was put in, and now it has access to its floodplain and will be able to follow its natural processes. Dry Creek is just, gosh, it's like scary even looking at some of these. So their goal was to reduce the sediment and nutrients on this dry creek. And as you can see, the left-hand side has no access to its floodplain. And so this required some real heavy machinery to lay that down and install some bank stabilization techniques there with woody debris and root rods within the side of the channel. So channel reconstruction alignment is always an option. This is applied when the channel is so severely damaged, like maybe it was straightened, that it doesn't have the energy to heal itself, and we don't see that in the future. These projects need heavy machinery brought in to completely reshape the channel. We physically carve a new meandering channel that mimics a natural pool riffle sequence, basically. The old channel is often just abandoned in these cases, or the ditch or whatever it may be, and we just this reestablish a new stable meandering channel. So incredibly invasive, incredibly expensive. It is a shock to the system, but in many cases this is needed. And 9 Mile is a great example of this. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's a straightened channel, and then you can see the outline of the old historic channel. So a new channel was put in, and 9 Mile had historic mining practices that caused tons of sediment input throughout the stream. This project also involved a lot of mining, tailings, excavation, and things like that. But they reduced that channel incision, increased the sinuosity of the stream, added riffle pool sequences throughout the stream, bank stabilization, everything that you need for a stable, healthy stream. Here's another part of just like the before and after, of course, of when you're down on the ground, there is no stream. They put a stream, and they used those root bank stabilization techniques to help that stream from continue or not eroding. They also had to excavate certain areas and just completely take out all the sediment deposition that occurred in the stream. It was a 6-phase project, and I think we're still on it. So this project took many, many years to accomplish. And many restoration projects do. Like, we just do segment after segment and move our way downstream as we go. Nevada Creek, this is another one that was to reduce nutrients and sediment load. The stream was completely washed out, and the channel was lost in certain areas, so that realignment was conducted. And then so bank stabilization, all of these realignments had bank stabilization. Eroding banks aren't automatically a problem. The goal is not really to stop channel movement. The goal is to maintain that stream function. Well, of course, protecting important resources associated with it. But we do have to stabilize the banks in some cases. So we want to protect them while minimizing whatever the impact is to the stream processes. So it's really important to use, or it's best to use on problem areas, not across the whole entire stream. And just not use it on like just as a default thing. I'm going to stabilize all these banks because they are really intrusive. and a lot of times streams are just following their natural processes. Nevada Creek has done this. So these root wads, like that we've been seeing. So the left-hand side, you see that eroded bank, then you see some wood stabilization here. These trees are anchored into the eroding bank. Often the root wad or the willows or whatever it is extending into the stream, and though that wood deflects the high velocity away from the bank, it traps the sediment, and it encourages just basically vegetation to establish, creating pools, and it's a much better choice rather than riprap, because riprap really just sends that high velocity down farther. So this is kind of protecting the stream while also minimizing or deflecting that velocity in a way that doesn't send it downstream and create more problems downstream. So if we are going to do bank stabilization techniques, there's ways that we can do it that hopefully minimize any downstream impacts. Here's another one of Nevada Creek where you're seeing some trees sticking out on the side of that right-hand side, the after picture. And then I really just want to talk about mine waste removal because it's just so, there's mines everywhere in Montana, and this is often appropriate for many of them, especially, of course, if we have mine-related contamination, where it's preventing the stream from meeting its water quality needs or from, supporting aquatic life. So removing or containing that source of pollution of the mine waste or the tailings is just the first step. And then after, we'll often have habitat and channel restoration techniques associated with it, but it is really great because it so directly addresses the root cause of contamination, but it is very expensive. So again, this is requiring heavy machinery, often uphill of a stream, which is really hard to access. So a lot of planning and permits go into this, and then we have to find some place to put the mine waste. But this is an option. We've done this through the 319 program, and it's incredibly beneficial. And it's, I don't remember what the percentage is for abandoned mine lands contamination in our streams, but it's really high. It's pretty high. So here's French Gulch placer tailings removal project. So this restored over 3 miles of stream in the wildlife management area, or Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area. It reconstructed the stream channel completely. It adjusts the floodplain. It established wetland areas, which is really cool. And it removed a ton of placer mine remnants, I think like over 40,000 cubic yards. Here's it during the implementation. So that arrow you see there is some, just like a pile of tailings, and that was removed along with the establishment of the floodplain. Before that was just seeping into the stream. So this is a case across Montana. We have these issues, and it does require often many funding sources to get these projects done because they are expensive, but they're well worth it. Here's another part. This whole pile is actually some tailings. And that's removed. Obviously there's this culvert, but they established this sort of floodplain area, planted some willows and trees and revegetated in there. And I don't have, this was in 2017. So I'm sure that there's a great picture of it after this, but we haven't been back there. But so this was another really successful project that just completely removed that stressor from the stream. Okay, and so those are the projects that I talked about. We have dozens and dozens more that we could spend forever on. But the take-home message is that these streams are dynamic. They're constantly changing in response to whatever disturbance it may be: floods, droughts, sediment movement, human activities. And basically, because of all of that, there's not a single restoration technique that works everywhere. The most successful restoration projects focus on restoring that natural channel processes that will eventually allow that stream to function on its own. So we can improve those processes. And then the stream can often continue improving long after we get the heck out of there. And so it's really important to remember that the more construction, the more construction that is happening doesn't mean better restoration. Bank stabilization isn't always the best case. In many cases, that passive or low tech approaches are sustainable and cost effective and allow that stream to continue on its own. In highly, altered systems or where infrastructure is at risk, or public safety is at risk, of course, then we want to get involved with those more intensive engineering techniques. But, I think we've just gone through this. Like, in order to know what restoration technique, you have to understand that root cause of degradation and pollution. If we don't address those underlying causes, then it's just gonna keep happening, and an expensive restoration project is unlikely to really provide lasting results. So it's, we want to choose the right technique, but we want it to be in the right place. And understanding the watershed, the root cause, what the site needs are, what the landowner needs are, is really the first step in every project. And 319 is great for helping you guys along the way of what projects could be beneficial. And just answering any of those questions. And on that note, are there any questions?
Yeah, please feel free to either unmute yourself or type a question into the chat. I do have one, Ella.
Yes.
Before and after pictures are so fun. They're so great.
I know.
They're
I
always
wanted to spend
encouraging.
more time on them, but I really want to get through the part about, like, you can't just, like, if you don't know what restoration, you don't jump to the restoration technique. But and we're getting better at our program of taking before and after pictures, like, of trying to get like exactly the before and after angle and everything. But those were some good ones. But oh gosh, we have so many. I could just spend all day.
Well, I was wondering if there was one maybe that, because I appreciate that you put in some of the measurable results that you had with either sediment load reduction or things like that. I was wondering if there was one of the pictures that you thought most demonstrated a change that was measurable. Because I know we didn't have it's not like this one we're talking about monitoring, but I know it does come up a lot. And I was curious if there was one that you see that also has just the biggest, like a most quantitative kind of impact.
I feel so biased because I have been working on the Mandeville Creek one, which was, we had the PALs, post-assisted log structures, and also the BDAs. I've been working on the monitoring results for that because every year at DEQ, we do go into monitoring more in-depth projects, more than we would every project. So every project requires monitoring to determine if it was a success or not. But we do qualitative and quantitative monitoring for a few projects every year, and Mandeville is one of those projects. And so we have been doing water quality monitoring on the surface water and groundwater impacts of that project. And so, and also those pictures were really good. I mean that there were the aerial pictures that showed a riparian corridor established and a wetland established, and the sediment reduction. So that, I think that was started in 2023. It was implemented in 2020, the beginning of summer of 2024. So I think in June of 2024 that was implemented. And in 2025, we saw a reduction in sediment like threefolds already, nutrient reductions, groundwater storage improvement, and water retainment. So it's just the groundwater is staying longer from the wetlands, from that flooding of the wetlands. huge nutrient reductions. Sediment reduction is the biggest one. Just Mandeville Creek is a unique maybe project in that at the beginning of the project site, we have two streams coming in, one that goes through agricultural lands, one that goes through the city of Bozeman. And so we have two very unique sources coming in, combining, and then going through the project site. So we actually have information of both of those streams. One's Farmers Canal, one's Upper Mandeville. And so you can kind of really understand the nutrient inputs from the agricultural land and then the sediment inputs from both agricultural land and the urban infrastructure. And so that one was amazing because the project isn't even complete and we're already seeing huge load reductions. And then of course, French Gulch placer mining, removing mine tailings. I mean, there's nothing more clear cut than actually removing a stressor and if you're looking at nutrient or metal reductions. And I think we've only had a few of projects like that associated with abandoned mine lands. And of course, we have abandoned mine lands here at DEQ, which assesses the risk factors of which ones need the most, or which ones need just the highest priority in terms of restoration. And I think I like those projects because they're so clear cut and because it's an immediate benefit to the fish and to everything downstream, but they do often require those long-term restoration techniques like a wetland and things like that take a lot longer as well. So there's many I guess aspects of those mining projects that make them really interesting because you're seeing short-term effects and those long-term effects, and both of them are kind of heavy hitters. Okay. Oh wait, is there? I see. Oh no, there's not. Okay.
Yeah.
I
Any
guess
other
that's it.
questions? Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have a couple minutes still, and it's since I can do our formal outro, but we could make the conversation a little less formal if there are other questions we wanted to ask. But thank
I
you
guess
so
I'll
much.
just put. Can
Yeah.
I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
Like I think I didn't go heavy into the restoration techniques because I want the point also to be, well, one, because of course I'm not an engineer, but more so, um, you know, I think I got that point home that like it's so important to understand what those stressors are before even thinking about a project. And DEQ and 319 is here to help, you know, escort people through that process. But you really don't have to know what is wrong yet. Like there's 319 program funds those design aspects of the project. And so all that really needs to be done is to work with the Watershed group who might be applying for 319 funding to get those first steps initially completed. And so, and we fund so many different projects in so many different weird aspects and phases. Like we fund one aspect of the project and not other aspects. So it's always worth putting your foot in the door and seeing if it's a project worth doing. Okay, that's it.
No, yeah, thank you so much for adding that. And I also do very much appreciate framing it as removing the stressors because we have talked a lot about what and how restoration, how people can approach it and what makes it most approachable. And I think thinking about it as removing stressors and improving that, lightening that load is a really nice, it's a very understandable way to talk about how these projects can improve a landscape. So yeah, I really like that framing. Thank you so much again. I am going to share some slides and then a little bit of information here and do a tiny bit of an outro so you can keep up with us and hear all the cool events that are happening this fall. We know you all are going to be very busy for the summer. So luckily we're not going to ask for too much of your time again until the fall, but also for the WAWAG, as we mentioned in the beginning, the Water Activities Working Group is going to help us continue to put out more education resources. So as you see these opportunities, please help us share it and get the word out there. So there's going to be a blog post later this summer, so keep your eye out for that. And we're going to also have a webinar in the fall. The blog post for the summer is going to discuss point source versus non-point source pollution, which I know is a very important topic, especially when it comes to how the programs can be funded. And it's typically not exactly a gray area, but there actually are a lot of times where it actually can be a little bit of a gray area. So that's really important just to keep reminding ourselves. And then in the fall, we'll talk more about tips for developing a watershed restoration plan. So it's also really important that the projects Ella talked about today do fit within a local restoration plan. And that's one of the great places that watershed groups in the conservation districts are helping to implement these projects. So then we'll follow up in the winter with funding opportunities to talk about watershed restoration.